Nigeria's oil industry is set for a new deal, of reforms as the long-awaited Petroleum Industry Bill has been passed in both the Senate and the House of Representatives, with slight adjustments in the percentage of funds for host communities. The bill did not scale through without drama by South-South senators. Well, Arise political editor captured it all.
Petroleum Industry Bill is one of the most recurrent bills in the Nigerian Parliament, spanning 13 years. It was first presented in 2008, but not passed, and when previously passed, it was not assented to until the 9th National Assembly passed the bill again at Thursday's plenary. The new bill strengthens governance in the oil and gas industry by decentralizing the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation. The new bill stops NNPC from its current role as an operator and regulator. It also provides a conducive environment for attracting investments into the petroleum and gas industry. But its passage did not happen without drama in the Senate. A joint committee of the Senate and House of Representatives had recommended that 5% be set aside for host communities, despite their earlier demand for 10% and the government's proposal of 2.5%. But at Senate plenary, host communities were allocated 3% of funds during consideration of Clause 240 of the bill. This angered senators from Niger Delta states.
No, there cannot be fund of order on this one is decided. What I'm asking for is not for me as a person, but it's for the interest of this nation. Because when we pass a good law, we must also have a good environment to implement the law. If the environment is not conducive for the implementation, we will all come back to also regret. That is my thinking.
Mr. President, this is law. This thing we are talking about is not coming to the pockets of anybody here. Everything is defined. And for the first time in all interventions in the Niger Delta region, this is the particular one that will go direct to the oil-bearing communities.
But other senators refused to buckle, while appealing to the South-South senators, and eventually, the 3% was maintained as equity shareholding for host communities that will see funds directly going to them.
To now start embarking or dividing ourselves along direction and along lines and along certain fault lines that could cause division and disunity for this country, I think that is a path to Armageddon.
The idea of increasing something, we are past that stage. We had the discussions and we voted. So I will appeal that we make progress, please.
The lawmakers then went ahead to fully pass the bill, including in the House of Representatives.
I hereby move that the House do consider the report of the Ad hoc Committee on Petroleum Industry Bill on a bill for an act to provide the legal, governance, regulatory and physical framework for the Nigerian petroleum industry, the development of host communities and for related matters, and approve the recommendations therein.
Third reading taken and the bill is passed. We promise Nigerians that we will do our best to pass the petroleum industry bill that have then so far at that time defied passage or defied assent. At least the demons have been defeated in this chamber. I want to assure the petroleum industry in Nigeria that what we have passed is a very good balance of giving them the kind of clement environment for them to not only stay here, but even bring more foreign investors into the oil and gas industry in Nigeria.
Subject to presidential assent, the new bill will also allow for 30% to go for frontier basin exploration in search of new oil fields in different states across the country. But the states were not mentioned, a move that may be deemed political. Lawmakers say the need to urgently and aggressively explore and develop new oil fields is due to fears that funding of fossil oil projects may run out in 30 years due to global quest for renewable energies. A harmonization committee will now be set up between the Senate and House of Representatives to iron out the differences in the resolutions reached by both chambers. Sumner Sambu, Arise News.
For a closer look at this development, we are joined by Chairman Senate Committee on Petroleum Upstream, BASSEY, AKPAN, and economist Paul Alaje in Lagos. Gentlemen, glad to have you join us. BASSEY, I'll start with you.
Okay.
Let's just do the preambles. The bill consists of 5 distinct chapters, I understand. Could you quite briefly break down these chapters for us before we get into the nitty-gritty?
Well, thank you for having me. And this bill, by the special grace of God, has 5 chapters. Chapter 1 of this bill, it's about governance and the institutions, where the bill creates the regulatory authorities, one for the upstream, which is the Upstream Regulatory Commission, and then one for the midstream and downstream, which is the authority, the regulatory authority. And then as well as they're also breaking down NNPC into a Kama company, where NNPC will now be run as a Kama company with proper regulatory oversight. And then also in the chapter 2 of this bill is the administration. And then chapter 3 is covers the issue of the fiscal, and as well chapter 4 is the host community. Then the 5th chapter covers all the miscellaneous and interpretations and all that, and the shadows. And then, of course, you know that this bill has been at the front burner of the National Assembly in the last 20 years. The first time an oil reform was embarked upon was, I think, in the days of Obasanjo in 2000. And ever since then, the industry has not been brought to steam with current realities. And what an investor looks at, it's the clarity of your laws and how sustainable those laws are. And then, of course, we've noticed also that in the industry, it's about your law, but this is one piece of documents. I was in the last Senate where we broke this document down into 4 parts. We had the host committee as a separate document, and we had the fiscal as a separate document, the administration as a separate document, and then the governance as a separate document. And I think what we have seen today is one of the products of the executive and legislative collaborations. And I think the Nigerian people are the winners for this.
All right, yes. Before we go to Paul Alaje, who is going to help us understand the general overview, whether he's impressed with this, and the question of whether this is not coming a little too late with the global, shift from fossil fuel to renewable energy that's actually moving very, very quickly. One of the aspects of this new bill that's just been passed is the issue of host communities and what exactly should be going into the development fund for the host communities. That led to some argument within the Senate. Help us understand exactly which is the host communities. I mean, when you talk about host communities, what exactly are you talking about? Is it just the oil-bearing communities, or the communities where pipelines and other infrastructure of the oil, sector will pass through? Help us understand the specifics.
Well, I think basically, I think the concept of host community has been there from inception of oil production in Nigeria, and then where the host community had described in this particular bill, it's where the settler, of course, where an owner of a license, whether an OML or OPL is, resides.
Okay.
That's within the context which the bill defines and host community. And the idea is, how can we create an enabling environment? Of course, you know that in the past we've had these issues of 13% derivation. We've had issues of the Niger Delta Ministry. We had issues of the NDDC. These were all initiatives that were actually meant to bring about a peaceful coexistence in the host communities to allow oil production to thrive. But this initiative have not actually yielded the more desired impact. So for once, we believe that the concept of host community in this time, and as described in this in this bill is where they can take their destiny in their own hands, where they can really manage the funds, no matter how little and no matter how well it comes. You know, so that's how the bill also defines it, and the bill also places responsibility on the host communities. I mean, like the saying goes that to whom much is given, much is equally expected. Yes, so it's a give and take.
All right, Bassey. We will still come down to this host community issue. We need some more breaking down because there's some things to be included. Paul is waiting there. But Paul, what do you make of it? And there's a cry in some quarters that the bill is anti-business. What do you say to that?
First of all, I would say I'm happy that this bill has been passed. Recall that before the passage of this bill, Nigeria has lost possible investment. Investors have found it very difficult to operate within Nigeria economy, and in cases where they have to operate, they need a lot of protection. Apart from protection, there is still a number of clarity that have no shape, requirement that has no shape in terms of clarity, operating businesses in Nigeria. But with this bill, from what we have seen at the preliminary level before the final passage, because we still need to look at what was passed.
All right, you're welcome back. You're still watching Newsnight. We're still taking a look at the passage of the Petroleum Industry Bill. LEDUN MITEE, a stakeholder in the oil-producing community and former president of the Movement for the Survival of the Ogoni People, is joining the conversation now. And we still have the chairman, Senate Committee on Petroleum, Upstream, BASSEY, AKPAN, in the studio. Thank you so much for joining us. Let me ask you one question, of course, before we take it to help us understand what are the key areas, the key additions to this bill, that's just been passed, that makes it the silver bullet that will solve Nigeria's, oil and gas or energy problems. And maybe you'd like also to help us understand this 30% of NNPC's profit that's to be set aside for exploration in frontier states. These frontier states were not named. Are you able to tell us exactly what these frontier states are?
Well, I think it's an opportunity to clarify most of the burning apprehension that has enveloped the passage of the PIB. First of all, I think the law defines frontier as areas where oil has never been found, or where there seems to be no data. And this area cuts across the entire country. And the frontier is divided into several stratas. You have the Chad Basin that covers the Borno-Gombe axis. You have the Bida Basins that covers the Niger State and part of Lokoja. And then you have the Anambra Basin that covers Anambra, Imo, and part of Abia. Then you equally have the Calabar Basin that runs through the Calabar axis. You also have the Dahomey Basins that cover Lagos and then takes us up to Benin Republic. So frontier is not strictly a nothing issue. That's what the law defines frontier has. So the funds to be so provided, which is about 30% of NNPC's share of profit oil.
As a limited liability company.
What that means is that NNPC, being the new limited liability company, of course, the government is a federation-owned company, not just federal government. It will now be the concessionaire on production sharing contracts, where, of course, once you are a concessionaire, and then the bill as it is pegs, of course, that under the production sharing contract, that it's about currently it is 100% cost recovered. But now that the government has come in and said, listen, the government wants to also take the benefits of most of its oil assets at the early lifespan, where the production is actually very, very, very high. So the bill now pegs the cost recovery by the contractor, in this case the IOCs or the NOCs, whichever case may be, at about 60%. So there is a 40% hover that is meant for the federation. That's what we do. That's what we know as the profit profit oil. So it is 30% of that NNPC takes into the frontier, because frontier development has become a national issue. No investor wants to go to an area where there are no data, where no seismic data to ascertain whether there is oil in such an area. So it now behoves on us as a country to do that.
All right, Bassey, we'll still come back to those issues. But we'll bring in LEDUN. LEDUN, you're there now. the executive proposed 2.5, I mean, for the host communities. We're talking the host communities now. The House passed 5, and then the Senate reduced it to 3. What do you make of that? There's been some cry that this doesn't seem to be enough for the host communities.
Well, absolutely. The issue of the percentage given is hopelessly lower than expected. When you have a law that pretends to solve the problems of the oil industry, you expect that one of the key areas it should address is those areas that has caused unrest in these areas. And 2 points that I want to make quickly about this. First is the issue that the bill creates what he calls the Host Community Development Trust. And if you look at what it does, that is a trust that is going to be an example of giving from one hand and taking from the other hand. What do I mean by that? You have the board of trustees. The membership is to be determined by the oil companies. The management committee, only one non-executive member is to come from the community. So you find again that what you find is another outfit like an NDDC controlled by people not from the areas that is going to manage that fund. And to make it worse, 5% of the trust fund is for administrative costs or for what they call special projects. So how do you take from one hand and give from the other? Now, there have been previous attempts, the PIB 20, the earlier attempts at PIB 208 and 2012 had proposed a 10%. Now you are reducing it from 5 to even 3. Seems to me that this is a retrogression and pays a deaf ear to the yearnings of the peoples of these communities.
LEDUN, because we don't have much time, what exactly would you have liked to see that can assuage, or meet at least halfway the demands of the host communities?
Well, there are several areas, but key, let me make this point. If you look at the laws on solid minerals, which is what they call the Minerals and Mines and Mining Act 2007, what that does is that it gives the communities more say over how their land should be used for exploitation of solid minerals, and says that no company will even commence development when it is solid minerals unless it has entered into a legally binding community development agreement that addresses, amongst other things, the educational, employment, health, infrastructural development, etc. of the community. Now, what that means, even before you commence, under the solid minerals, you have a situation that the company, the state government, the local government, and the communities are going to be involved in decision-making about what goes on. Now, what you have created, once you are lucky to have oil, you are lucky to have solid minerals on your land, then you have a say. You have...
All right, LEDUN, would like to thank you so much for your contribution. BASSEY, let me ask you this quickly. The Senate retained provisions of Clause 29 of the bill, but approved the establishment of Nigerian upstream and downstream petroleum regulatory authority. What will be their function?
Well, I think the key essence of this bill is the domestication of a midstream and downstream, because the greater efforts, greater attention will now be focused on driving the midstream. Midstream in the sense that We all know the threats to, like you had said earlier, the threats to the funding and financing of on fossil fuel, and the need for us to deepen the usage of our gas resources. Like Paul had actually stated earlier in the program, that there is no threat to gas, so we need to refocus on driving gas into our domestic market. That's what the authority will drive.
Okay.
Yes,
very quickly,
it's for midstream and then downstream. Yes.
Do you want to respond to what LEDUN MITEE said? Because you were actually shaking your head when
all I can say is that
especially on the host communities, of course.
MITEE is based his argument on the bill that came to the National Assembly. What we have passed today is quite different in content. We have taken into cognizance the apprehension in the host community. Mind you, before we presented this bill, we have done an on-the-spot assessment of the host community. We have taken inputs from them, and those inputs have all been reflected in the document.
What figure are we expecting to see? Because the Senate passed 3%, while the House of Reps passed 3%. Very quickly, in 2 seconds.
When we get to that bridge, we'll cross it.
We'll cross it.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much, BASSEY, AKPAN, for your contributions here.